What's going on, and welcome back to Front Yard Fantasy. Today we are talking two wide receivers to avoid in your redraft leagues. And these are two guys that we're not saying, avoid them no matter what, no matter where they get drafted. That's not the point. We're saying, at the current cost, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to buy into these two guys. And yes, they are good players. We know the talent argument. It's right now we're arguing against situation. And that's the biggest concern. So before we get into it, though, remember, if you like what we're doing at FYF, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, questions, comments, drop all that stuff below. Follow us on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter if you want. The first guy, again, you've read the chapters. You know who it is. It is DK Metcalf. And right now, he is being drafted based on Fantasy Pros at wide receiver 18. Again, they pulled together a bunch of different sources. So as a high, he's going at wide receiver 15. As a low, he's going at wide receiver 20. So it's a pretty narrow range. And people are, locked in on him finishing, as a mid-tier or high-end wide receiver 2. It's the only reason you draft him there, right? You're drafting him at wide receiver 18 with the assumption he's going to kick the crap out of that ADP and he's going to help win you leagues. Why else would you take him there? The concern is, a number of things. Obviously, one, Russell Wilson is gone. This offense is going to look and feel a whole lot different. It's going to be worse. I mean, significantly worse without Russell Wilson, who is, depending on who you talk to, potentially a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And now he gets either career journeyman Geno Smith or, known bust Drew Lock. Neither is good, and I don't really think there's one I prefer. They're both just bad quarterbacks. So before we get into, why exactly neither are a good fit for DK, just look at what DK Metcalf did last year, right? Splitting time with Russell Wilson and Geno Smith. Wide receiver 23 in points per game, but since he played 17 games, he finished at wide receiver 14. But again, even last year, DK Metcalf was a bad pick based on ADP because obviously Russell Wilson was playing with 9 fingers basically, and again, Geno Smith took time. And yes, right, he did play well from a fantasy standpoint with Geno Smith, but is that something you can expect to continue to happen? I don't think it is. I mean, when you just look at those 3 games with Geno Smith, he averaged 17 points a game. That's great. But when you dig in, it's pretty disgusting, right? He's averaged 6 targets a game. He averaged only 65 yards a game. And the kicker here, he averaged 1 touchdown a game. That's how you get to 17 on only 16 targets a game, again, with under 70 yards receiving. And the upside, it's really difficult to find a path forward to him, 1, reproducing that, or 2, exceeding it next year. Air yards. With Russell Wilson, he was consistently over 100 yards a game. And that's the upside. That's the tangible upside of a guy that has the capability with the right QB to go for 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 yards. With Geno Smith, air yards cut by over 50%. He's down to 49.3 a game, which means they're throwing slants, they're throwing screens. So they're finding ways to get him the ball, but it's not high leverage situations. It's not high producing, type of plays or shots down the field. It's just low average depth of target, low volume, and that's terrifying, right? You look at his 17-game pace, and again, it's a 3-game sample, so it's small. 102 targets, 1,100 yards, 838 air yards. Those two don't make any sense. Those are probably going to be flipped this year, if anything. And that's if he, comes even close to 1,000 air yards, which if it's Geno Smith, don't expect that. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to expect it. And then obviously the touchdowns would be a 17 touchdown pace over 17 games. Now, is that likely? No, not even a little bit. The expected total on 17 games with Geno Smith last year would have been 4 touchdowns. So you're looking at a guy, around 70 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That's not a top 2 or a top 20 wide receiver. It's barely a top 30 guy. It's just the path forward with Geno Smith is kind of reckless. It's not going to be good. He's going to have big games because it is DK Metcalf, but the consistency, and you're not going to look at wide receivers for consistency technically, but a guy you draft that high, you're hoping for some week-to-week consistency. It's not going to happen with Geno Smith. The other option, Drew Lock might be worse, right? Again, and the thing people are going to throw at you is, well, Drew Lock was a quarterback when Courtland Sutton broke out. Yes, technically, but really, Courtland Sutton broke out in spite of Drew Lock. In that 2019 season, Courtland Sutton averaged 14.6 a game with Joe Flacco. Drew Lock came in, and he averaged 12.6. He took Courtland Sutton from a wide receiver 2 down to a mid-level, low-end wide receiver 3. He just kind of crushes pass catchers' volume. And when you look at the guys he's been playing with, where Russell Wilson now is, Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant, for their careers in games that Drew Lock has started, Courtland Sutton averages 8.8 points a game. Jerry Jeudy averages 8.9. And Noah Fant averages 9.8. None of his weapons average double digits. Now, DK Metcalf is better, and I don't think he averages 9 points a game. But at the current price, you can't buy in. It's too much. I mean, if you look at the guys going around him, you got Mike Williams, Brandon Cooks, Deontay Johnson. I'll take Mike Williams. Again, he just finished as a top 12 wide receiver in points per game. And yeah, it's sporadic and gross, but at the same price as DK Metcalf, the ceiling's higher because he's playing in an elite offense with Justin Herbert. I'll take those chances for a guy that could see very similar target volume. I'll take the quarterback as the differentiator there. You're looking at Brandon Cooks. You're looking at a guy that's going to see 150, maybe 160 targets with Davis Mills. That kind of volume should overcome, again, low volume in a run-first offense and a bad quarterback. I'm fine with that. And then Deontay Johnson. Again, another volume play, and honestly a player who is a good wide receiver. Obviously, he's not DK Metcalf, but he's a very good wide receiver. He was 4th in expected fantasy points per game last year. And now he's getting drafted around DK Metcalf, who was worse last season and is probably going to be significantly worse this year. Again, DK Metcalf, I'm out on for right now. If the price drops to wide receiver 3 range, sure, I don't expect it to get there. Moving on to our second wide receiver. Obviously, again, you looked at the chapter. You know it is Amari Cooper. And Amari Cooper right now is being drafted at wide receiver 22. Again, on Fantasy Pros, it's weird because overall it's technically wide receiver 25, but there's nobody else in the 23 to 24 range. So he falls at wide receiver 22. It's weird, but that's where he's going, with a high of 22 and a low of 31, which actually isn't bad. If that's where he lands, great, I'm fine with Amari, 2 rounds later than its current ADP. But that's not where he's going on consensus. The reason Amari Cooper is it's a gross pick is, at this point, we know Deshaun Watson is not playing at least 6 games. In reality, it could be the entire season. And if you're telling me I got to spend a pick, again, very similar to DK Metcalf, if I have to spend a pick that high in a draft for a guy I'm not going to be able to trust for 6 to 12 to 17 weeks potentially, there's no chance I'm buying in. And obviously that ADP is going to plummet once the Deshaun Watson news comes out and we find out what that suspension is. But until then, while people are drafting, this is where he's going. And it's just chaotic because we haven't seen him produce, the upside necessary to be drafted there in the last 4 seasons, right? Last year with Dak Prescott, wide receiver 29 in points per game. In 2020, wide receiver 22 in points per game. In 2019, wide receiver 17. That 5 ADP jump isn't worth it to me. And then again, 2018, he was the wide receiver 22 in points per game. You're not drafting him at wide receiver 22 hoping for wide receiver 22, right? It's about upside. You want someone that's going to beat their ADP, not just meet it. Otherwise, it's a wasted pick. It's just a guy that we all love as a player, but for fantasy, he's never really done it because he's not a true alpha. He doesn't, go and earn that 25% target share. And quite literally, he's never done that. He's never been over 22.3%, and that was back in 2016. His only season with a target share of upwards of 22%. So it's, again, he's not a true alpha wide receiver in that sense, and it's just not a guy people should be buying into to finally fill that role because it'd be the first time in his career he would do that. And now, if we look at the potential quarterback for 6 to 17 games here, Jacoby Brissett, what can you expect? His second year in the league, he started 16 games. He averaged 193 passing yards a game with a completion percentage of 60%, 60.2 for his career. So basically an inaccurate quarterback that doesn't really throw for a lot of yards. I don't know why you would be interested in the lead receiver there, right? Unless Amari Cooper is going to be taking 30, 40% of the work. What's the appeal? What's the upside, right? You're looking at a guy that's likely a wide receiver 3 being drafted as a wide receiver 2. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. The path forward, unless he's getting Deshaun Watson, week 7, just doesn't make sense. Why burn a roster spot the majority of the season on a high pick that may not even pan out because Deshaun Watson can come back and be rusty and have no chemistry, right? Like, it's not even a guarantee he blows up with Deshaun Watson. It's just an all-around gross situation. If you're looking at guys going right after him that I think are, significantly more appealing at wide receiver, Courtland Sutton. We've seen him command a lot of targets. We've seen him produce, and now he gets Russell Wilson. He has upside. He has the better quarterback. He has the better offense. Give me Courtland Sutton every day. Hollywood Brown, even if it's just for the first stretch of the season, those first 6 weeks without DeAndre Hopkins are probably going to be better than anything Amari Cooper does this year. It's just a fact. And it's the first 6 weeks of the season, which can put you on the right path for the playoffs, which is all we really care about, right? Hollywood's going to get off to a hot start in Arizona with Kyler, his college quarterback. It just makes a lot of sense. Give me him over Amari Cooper with zero hesitation. And the last one here, again, I am a Bears fan, so a little bit of bias, but I'll take Darnell Mooney because, again, Darnell Mooney is going to see 140 to 150 targets. I don't know if Amari Cooper sees that. And, it may be early or, maybe it's probably the correct thing to say. Justin Fields is better than Jacoby Brissett. He's going to throw for more than 193 yards. That defense is going to be decent enough, but the Bears are going to be playing from behind a ton, where the Browns are probably going to be semi-competitive, basically running the ball down teams' throats and playing defense. The Bears are going to be trailing consistently. The volume, the game script is going to go Mooney's way. Give me Darnell Mooney over Amari Cooper right now. All right, guys, that is all we have for you. Again, if you like what we're doing, subscribe, like the video, question, comments, drop all of it below. As always, thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.